They called it unsinkable. The biggest, most luxurious, most advanced ship ever built. A floating palace of steel and dreams slicing through the Atlantic. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, pretty much everything. The story of the Titanic isn't just a tale of one unlucky night. It's a story of a $500 million mistake, a catastrophe that was almost designed to happen. Forget what you think you know, because we're about to break down why the unsinkable Titanic absolutely had to sink. Let's start with the big one, the fatal flaw baked right into the ship's design. The Titanic was famously equipped with watertight compartments. The idea was genius, really. If the hull got breached, you could seal off the flooded sections and the ship would stay afloat. There were 16 of these compartments, and the ship could supposedly survive even if the first 4 were completely filled with water. Sounds pretty safe, right? Wrong. The engineers made one tiny, catastrophic oversight. The walls separating these watertight compartments didn't go all the way up to the main deck. They stopped a few feet short. Imagine an ice cube tray. You can fill one section with water and it stays put. But if you tilt the tray just a little too much, the water spills over the barrier into the next section, and then the next, and the next. That is exactly what happened to the Titanic. When the iceberg tore a gash through 5 compartments, one more than the ship was designed to handle, it was game over. As the boat dipped into the freezing ocean, water filled the first 5 compartments, reached the top of those bulkheads, and just slopped right over into compartment number 6, then 7, then 8. It was a slow, unstoppable cascade of failure, an elementary design flaw that turned the ship's greatest safety feature into a complete joke. It wasn't unsinkable, it was a giant, very expensive, and very deadly ice cube tray. Now, let's talk about what held this floating palace together, or rather, what didn't. The ship was constructed using over 3 million rivets. Think of them as the metal bolts that clamp all the steel plates of the hull together. For the most part, these were high-quality steel rivets, strong and reliable. But here's where the corner cutting comes in. The builders, Harland and Wolff, had trouble getting enough high-quality steel rivets, and their machinery couldn't install them in the tight, curved spaces at the bow and stern of the ship. So, what did they do? They switched to a cheaper, lower-quality alternative, wrought iron rivets, and they installed them by hand. Now, under normal conditions, these might have been fine. But on the night of April 14, 1912, the conditions were anything but normal. The North Atlantic was bitterly cold. This extreme cold made the low-grade iron rivets incredibly brittle. When the Titanic scraped against the iceberg, these cheap rivets at the front of the ship didn't bend. They fractured like glass. They popped right out, allowing the steel plates to separate and creating a series of gaps along the hull. It wasn't one giant hole like in the movies. It was more like a long, leaky zipper being pulled open. They saved a bit of money on the rivets, but this decision helped seal the fate of over 1,500 people. It was a classic case of penny-wise, pound-foolish on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. So we have a flawed design and weak materials. What could possibly make this situation worse? How about human arrogance? The Titanic was trying to make a statement. It wasn't just a passenger ship. It was a symbol of industrial might and a bid for the transatlantic speed record. The captain, Edward Smith, was under immense pressure from the White Star Line's chairman, who was on board, to make a splashy, record-breaking arrival in New York. This ambition trumped all common sense. On the day of the disaster, the Titanic's radio room received at least 6 separate, increasingly urgent warnings about massive ice fields directly in their path. 6 warnings. But were they heeded? Did they slow down? Absolutely not. They maintained a speed of around 22 knots, nearly full speed, plowing headfirst into a known minefield of icebergs at night in a ship the size of a skyscraper. Why? To shave a few hours off the journey and grab some headlines. The lookouts in the crow's nest didn't even have binoculars. They had been misplaced, and the key to the locker where they were kept was with an officer who had left the ship before it sailed. They were relying on the naked eye to spot a mountain of ice in the dark while traveling at high speed. It wasn't just bad luck. It was a conscious, reckless decision to prioritize speed and ego over the safety of every single person on board. This brings us to the most tragic and infamous failure of all, the lifeboats. By law, the Titanic was only required to carry enough lifeboats for about 1,978 people. That sounds insane, right? The ship had over 2,200 passengers and crew, but the regulations at the time were hopelessly outdated and hadn't kept up with the massive size of these new superliners. The rules were based on a ship's tonnage, not its passenger capacity. But here's the truly unforgivable part. The Titanic was originally designed to carry more lifeboats, enough for everyone. However, the designers and the company decided to remove them. Why on earth would they do that? Aesthetics. They thought a deck cluttered with too many lifeboats looked ugly and would spoil the view for the first-class passengers on their promenade. They literally chose a clean look over saving lives. Their logic was simple. The ship is unsinkable, so why would we ever need them? This arrogance meant that even if the evacuation had been perfectly executed, more than 1,000 people were doomed from the start. There was simply no room for them. When the time came, chaos ensued. Lifeboats were launched half-empty because crew members didn't know their capacity, and panic took over. The decision to remove those ugly lifeboats turned a crisis into an absolute slaughter. So let's put it all together. You have a ship with a fundamental design flaw that ensures it will sink if it takes on too much water. You have cheap, brittle rivets in the exact spot that's about to get hit, guaranteeing the hull will split open. You have a captain ignoring multiple direct warnings and steaming at full speed into an ice field to impress his boss. And finally, you have nowhere near enough lifeboats because they looked cluttered. When the Titanic struck that iceberg, it wasn't a freak accident. It was the predictable climax of a story written with arrogance, greed, and a series of terrible decisions. Each mistake compounded the last, creating a perfect storm of failure. The design flaw meant it would sink. The cheap rivets meant the impact would be devastating. The reckless speed made the impact unavoidable. And the lack of lifeboats made the loss of life catastrophic.